Hi, I'm Stuart and welcome to the channel. Well, we had a lovely hot summer here in the north of England, so much so that it caused drought conditions. But now it seems to have changed and we've got a lot of cold and rainy weather. I'm still hopeful of getting out sometime before Christmas, but for the moment we're stuck in the garage. So my thoughts were starting to turn to what we can do with Rita and our winter projects. Now, one of the issues with Rita is the suspension is very crude and basic, built down to a price. The front forks are 38mm Paolis, and a lot of trials bikes of the time use them, but these are unadjustable and not able to be changed much at all. Even the spring rate, I can't get a replacement set of springs for it. So if we're going to do anything to it, we're going to need to move to one of the better sets of Paoli 38mm. I say lots of trials bike use them around this period, and most of them had damping control and changeable springs. So I think we'll look for a set of those to graft onto the front of Rita. Once we do that, of course, it's going to show up the ollie shock at the back as again being very crude and poor quality. So I think we need to upgrade that to a better quality shock to try and match the improvement we're going to make to the front. I think over this winter we'll also have a look at this seat. The cover on it is now cracked and splitting, and it's always been really uncomfortable. So I think while the bike's apart, we'll get this off and send it to a local upholsterer for a new cover and maybe some different quality foam underneath there. Right, we've moved the bike out into some space and we've got it up on the stands because it's time to start putting things back together again. That's always a good time. So I think we'll start with the back end and put the new shock in. Now, if you're doing this for the first time, make a note of where your spaces go when it comes out so you can put it back together again in the right order. I'll just take a little bit of weight off the wheel. That should slide straight out. Just hang the brake caliper there, ready to go back on. And if we shove the wheel forwards, then we should be able to get the chain off. Very good. One wheel done. Now we have to attack the linkage. I usually put these things on really tight, so it's going to be a struggle. Right, my theory is that if I undo the front dog bone mount, which is here, then this dog bone should swing out of the way and give me access to this, which is the shock absorber mounting bolt. There's one at the top and one at the bottom. So let's see if that theory is correct. Oh, well, that is very tight. I think I'm going to have to go for my long pry bar. Right, this is a 1 meter torque bar, which should give me enough leverage to undo that. Need 3 hands for this job. There we go. Now normally when I'm doing this I would also at the same time re-grease the bearings when I put it together, but I did that only about a month ago, so no need this time. But if you are doing it yourself, there we go, it's a good opportunity to service those items. One bolt out. Let's see if the theory is now correct. There we go. Lovely job. So now we can get to the bottom mount. When you're trying to push the bolts out, if you just take a little of the weight off the suspension, that will just make them easy to slide out. So now the linkage swings out of the way and we have access to our shock. So now we can move to the top mount. Right, to get to the top bolt we're going to need to remove the tank. Thankfully it's just one bolt that does it. Then you have to get this little groove in the tank around the post that secures the battery strap. So you just pull it towards you and then up. It should come away and then slide the whole lot backwards. There we go. Right, with the tank out of the way, the top bolt for the shock is just at the end of the spine of the frame here. Not a lot of room, so I think I'm going to use a ratchet. Now if you're using these ratchet spanners, one word of caution, and you can work out for yourself how I know this, make sure you've always got clearance to be able to get the spanner off the end of the bolt once the bolt has been backed out, because if you can't get it off you can't tighten it up to get it off because it's a ratchet. So just bear that in mind, always make sure you've got access to get the spanner out afterwards. Right, the shock absorber is loose at the top, so if we lift the swinging arm out of the way and keep the linkage back, it should just slide out, and it does. Right, let's get the new one. Right, so here we have the original one and the reconditioned one. What I'm going to do before I just put it in, I'm actually going to measure the amount of threads that are showing on this one. 12, and I'm going to set the new shock to the same. Now I'll do the preload properly once we've got it on the bike, but this will just give me a rough starting place for it. Right, we've set the threads to the same. We have to remember now to tighten up the locking pin. Just gently, it doesn't need to be much. And remember to put your spacers into the end of the shock when it goes in. Now I've put a little bit of grease inside the spaces as well, just to make sure the bolts don't rust into them. Right, so hopefully this should just be a reverse of how we dismantled it. Well, that was a fiddly job, holding the chock up while trying to slide the bolt in. Right, let's get this buttoned up. Right, now we just re-engage the bottom mount with the pivots. There we go. And tighten that up. Now I'm sure there is a torque measurement for these, but I just rely on effing tight. Let's check it's moving alright. Lovely. We just re-engage the dog bone. Lovely. Right, that's all tight. Let's put the wheel back on. Right, first job, I'm going to re-engage the chain. Right, next thing we're going to do is engage the brake. It hooks onto a pin on the swing arm. Right, now on mine I have different spacers to standard because I've got a non-standard rear wheel. Right, now we slide in the chain side spacer. Now if you're working on your own, I can highly recommend these things. They're little inflatable cushions and they've got a valve on the end and a pump, and all you do is you put them underneath the tyre and you can lift it up to the appropriate height to get the axle through. Let's do that. So slide it under the tyre. And just pump up until the wheel's at the appropriate height. And they'll slide in nice and easily. Let's tighten all this up. Right, we can now take out the pressure bag and release the pressure from it. Check everything's still moving. Excellent. Right, so there's one final job to be done, and that's to see if it still moves. And it does. So that's job done. Now I'll leave the tank off because it'll just save it getting scratched when we do the front forks. So let's move on to that. Right, although there's a lot more parts on the front end, it's probably going to be a lot easier because they're all exposed and easy to get to. So let's start off with a quick strip down. Right, that's everything apart. Let's start rebuilding. Right, we'll start by reassembling the forks. I'm just going to tighten them loosely into place because when I do the final fitting I want to tighten from the bottom up to the top to make sure they stay aligned. And when I do tighten them up I'll be using proper torque settings. We've got steel screws here going into aluminium, and that's a good recipe for stripping a thread, so we'll use proper torque figures when we do that. Right, let's get this in here. Right, that's one. Right, forks are in. Right, next job is the wheel. Before we put the spindle in, we're just going to paint it with a little bearing grease. Don't need much. Just give it a very light coating to stop it rusting into place. Then we introduce the spindle, and to get everything lined up I'm going to use my lifting bag again. Make sure we put our spacer in, mustn't forget that. We just line the two up. Lovely, let's get a torque wrench. Right, so torque on the axle bolt is 69 Newton meters, which is quite a lot. Oh, there we go. First job done. And we can take our bag out and move on. Right, for the next job we're going to install the wheel brace. And when I do this, I've actually bought some spacers which will lift the mud guard up and give us a bit more mud clearance. So let's fit this. So the spacers just sit underneath the brace, and we've got extended screws to fix them in place. Right, so with that installed, you can see there's now quite a good gap underneath the mud guard, so we shouldn't get clogged up with mud. Right, start tightening everything up. Right, we'll start tightening up now, and we'll start tightening from the bottom up to the top. That way the axle sets the alignment and the rest hopefully just follows in. Before we put the pinch bolts in, I'm just going to add a tiny touch of copper slip to them. This is one of those cases where it's steel going into aluminium. I don't want any chemical reactions causing them to jam in there. Now, as I say, with these alloy ones, I am going to torque them up. So these I know are 10 foot-pounds. Sorry, 10 newton meters, not foot-pounds. And I'm not going to tighten them all the way at once. I'm going to tighten each screw in turn so we're not twisting at all. That's 10. And that's 10. We'll just check the first again, because the two are both pulling on the same piece of metal. Yeah, tightening one can loosen the other. Perfect. Right, move on up to these. Now, I don't have a torque setting for these, so I'll just do them tight. Right, move on up to the yokes now. And this time, check my notes. We need to move up to 20 newton meters. Again, bottom up. And again, because there are two pulling on one clamp, I'm going to do them evenly so it doesn't twist. Double check the first. Yeah. Right, finally the top bolt. Same again, 20 newton meters. Right, so that's everything tightened up. Next job is to tackle this brake caliper. Right, it's time to swap over the calipers now. I've been working out where my best line will be for the brake. I think that's probably it. What I'm going to do is take the hose off the old one and onto the new one. Now, it will leak a little bit, but I've left the cap on the reservoir, So hopefully as soon as we get a vacuum in there, it'll stop any more coming out. So we should get a little bit of leakage, but hopefully not too much. Only one way to find out. I hope you enjoyed watching, and that's all from me. Until the next time. Right, that's the old one off. Make sure we've got our copper washers top and bottom, and tighten it in. Right, we can bolt that caliper on and get everything bled through. Right, before we tighten everything up, we have to make sure that this sensor is over the top of our magnetic wheel bolt to count the revolutions. So just get the wheel bolt in place. We want to be close to it but not touching it. Right, now I can tighten up these bolts to the right torque. Right, the torque of the brake mount is 26 Newton meters. So we'll just get that to right torque. That one's good. And that one's good. Right, we'll sort out routing these wires in a minute. But for now, we'll get on with bleeding the brakes. Right, in order to bleed the brakes with only me here, I'm using this little brake bleeding device, which will stop oxygen getting back into the system. So if we just put that over the bleed nipple, a nice tight fit, and then we open up the bleed nipple. We'll just balance this on a box so we don't pull it off. Right, now we need to go up to the top. Right, for those that haven't seen one before, this is a master cylinder and it's full of brake fluid. Now brake fluid is nasty stuff and eats paintwork, so we're going to start by just protecting the area in case we have any drips. We'll try to get it about level. Right, now there's two screws holding the top on, and these are not standard screws, they are Japanese industrial standard JIS, so make sure you use JIS tips to get them off, and then you won't screw them up. No problem. So when we lift the cap off, there's then a plastic shape that holds everything in place. When we lift that off, there's a rubber gasket, and you could see it was, I don't know if you could see that, but it was sucked right down. This is what keeps the vacuum for us. And when we take that out, the fluid is underneath. Now what we're going to do is we're going to fill the reservoir up and keep pumping until it gets out of the bottom. I say we didn't lose much fluid when we put the caliper on, so hopefully it shouldn't take too long for it to come through. The secret is we must keep this topped up, otherwise we get even more air into the system. Now here's a tip for you: if you're pouring out brake fluid, it can go everywhere. So what I do is I punch 2 holes in the foil cap, one to let air in and one to let fluid out, and that way we can have a nice controlled flow. Without it going everywhere. So we're just going to pump the brake lever now. And I'm keeping my eye on the pipe down at the bottom, and I can see that fluid is starting to come through there. But you see the pipe here, as I pump it, the fluid comes down. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the lever in while I tighten up the bleed nipple. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to pump up the brakes and then release the valve, close the valve, and then release the brake lever. So pump the brake and then hold it, release the pressure, close the valve and release the brake lever. So it's just a kind of rhythm to get going there. So already I'm starting to get some pressure there. Yeah, and the brake is now operating. So it didn't take too long to bleed at all. But I'm going to do one other little trick, and that's tonight when I leave it, I'm going to tie the brake lever back against the bars. What that does is that if there's any air in the pipe, it will just float up and it'll allow it to come out of the top. Very good. Let's move on to some tidying. Right, so I'm just going to clean away any excess that's got onto the faces. We don't want that squeezing out. I've topped up the brake fluid. So the next thing is to put this in. Now let's just pop it back into shape. There we go. So the first thing is the rubber seal. Next comes a little plastic shaping plate. And finally the top plate. Before I put the screws back in, just a tiny dab of copper slip. To keep them in place and stop them binding up. Take away our paper towel and we're done. So the final job, just take off the bleed, make sure you catch any loose fluid. Now I'm going to dry any fluid from around the caliper because I want to be able to see if it leaks. We've got a rubber cap that goes over everything. And we're finished. So the next job is to tidy up some of these cables, make sure they're not catching anywhere, and put the mud guard on. Right, before we start tying in the cables, let's just fix the mudguard. Now the tyre is just catching on some screws. I put on this extra mud flap and the screws on it are just catching. So I might need to look at that. Right, start sorting these cables out. Right, I think that looks quite neat. Nothing's catching. I think we'll call that finished. Right, just one more thing to try, and that's to give it a bounce and see if everything moves. Right, grab the brake. Oh, they're a lot firmer than they were before. But everything's moving. So as I say, we'll do the final setup on the bike, which will be next. So I hope you enjoyed watching, and that's all from me. Until the next time.